Welcome to the Sensory Empower podcast. I'm Bethany, your host. I'm a holistic occupational therapist with over a decade of experience in supporting individuals helping to transform their world through sensory empowerment. This podcast is your guide to the transformative world of sensory storytelling, holistic tools, and empowerment strategies. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Sensory Empower the podcast. On today's episode, I am really just so excited to share some big wins and the really cool perspective that I get as a occupational therapist and a parent coach is getting to see what deeply resonates with families, what themes pop up, and what really can be a very powerful implementation of strategies. Parent coaching can be a very powerful technique, which is why I'm so deeply passionate about it. So as a holistic occupational therapist, I love coaching on the nervous system and sensory systems. I really feel like this is a deep core root piece with a lot of what I see with impact, understanding each other, and that empathy piece with sensory processing and ongoing implementation, because I'm only maybe coaching and providing those resources for 1 hour a week or 1 hour maybe every other week. And that parent coaching piece allows the empowerment of the parents to feel like they are the ongoing sensory detectives in their day, in their evening, in their routines, out in the community, how things transition after school, and coming up with the wait a second. So sensory goggles are sometimes how I also explain with families, just when we're thinking about the impact that can happen, is empowering you with the resources to where you feel like you've got a really good handle of the before, the after, and what was resourceful, what was effective as a sensory tool or a nervous system regulation tool that kind of cause and effect. So parent coaching is really deeply rooted, I feel like, and it's really, really cool to be able to offer this both virtually online as well as local in-home in the local Salem area. And it's so much more than sticker charts, behavior charts, not just cueing like, we just gotta be more consistent. No, this is deep-rooted, nervous system informed, sensory rooted parent coaching. And so I'm going to share a little bit about what that looks like, how some of my clients have really felt so deeply empowered, because it really is so cool to see when a parent really starts to understand their child's sensory system and their own nervous system and sensory system. Everything starts to shift. The insight, the perspective, the locations, catching things before they deeply escalate into a sensory overload moment. It's so powerful. And what I observe is a big increase in confidence. So, wow, I totally pre-planned bringing these tools. And then I offered them to my child as they were starting to escalate. And it worked. It worked. And these big beaming smiles. And that just my heart just knows how crucial this is, and which is why I'm so deeply passionate about supporting in this way, because those are the life-changing moments. And I know that sounds like a big statement to share, but it's very moving sometimes to be able to be the facilitator and educator, and then to start to taper away to see if the parents start to become the experts, which you are. You're the expert of what your child needs. And with this new knowledge and new ways of brainstorming and problem solving and stepping into curiosity, it can make some massive impacts. So I really feel in the state of a lot of things happening in our world where nervous systems, I'm just observing a collective, the nervous system dysregulation is happening more often, more frequently throughout the day. Why is parent coaching so important? In the last few months, I've really had a beautiful privilege to work and support some families through virtual parent coaching sessions, in-home family unit sensory profile analysis, which I'll dive a little bit more into that a little bit later. And what I keep witnessing is this, parents are not lacking effort. They're lacking the information and the strategic ways to implement those different strategies. They're reading books, they're watching YouTube videos, implementing strategies, but what about those deep-rooted pieces to have a very vast understanding and then spark that curiosity in the moment of, I'm trying these things, let me do a little trial, and I'm going to notice what are the alertness levels of my child when we go into this situation, maybe going to a public pool versus a library. Two very different sensory experiences. There's a lot with auditory. There's a lot with a reverberation of the sound, having been a swimmer the majority of my life and recalling many a swim meet. That's a loud sensory location. Because it hits the wall and then comes back to your ear, it can be a harder location for a lot of individuals that have a harder time processing sensory, especially auditory sensory feedback, more inclined to have a small sensory cup. That can be a really overwhelming experience. Going underwater, maybe we don't hear as much. So maybe that is being in the water and swimming and floating on our back, and those sorts of things might be a little bit of an easier participation with a place that reverberates a lot of loud auditory pieces. And then we think about maybe the contrast of like book read aloud at a library. Generally a little bit of a quieter location. It might also be significant in how many people are there as well. So that is also a big piece with community integration, how that can play in. But some of those other pieces of education that I love, that kind of gives an example of maybe how we would coach through and brainstorm. Was it the environment? Was it the sound? Was it the frequency of the sound, the volume of the sound, the duration of the sound? It's a lot of brainstorming and bringing in, sparking curiosity about the environmental impacts on regulation. And then how sensory systems influence behavior. So if we're noticing that we're shifting and we're moving from that regulated state maybe into, if we want to reference the zones of regulation as an example, moving into a yellow zone state. So I'm starting to increase in my alertness. I'm starting to maybe vocalize like, that's too much, or I need an ear tool, or I am starting to get frustrated that things are not going my way. I'm starting to amp up. What are some of those pieces that we can use as a sensory tool, nervous system regulation strategy that could help that child move back to a regulated, what we may call green zone state versus fully lid flipping, right? Full lid flip. Our emotional brain is now active and our frontal lobe thinking brain is not engaged. If we flip our lid into a red zone moment where maybe anger, yelling, extreme elated feelings, right? It can be like, I'm so excited, I can't even handle it. We're in a dysregulated excitement. Can't even control my body. My voice is super loud. My pupils are really dilated and my alertness level is through the roof. Very high alertness level. So those are a couple pieces when we think about sensory systems, sensory needs, environment, how it can shift behavior, and then what are maybe some of those ways where we can model. So this is another piece I coach a lot on with parents, is how their own nervous system can impact co-regulation. So what is co-regulation? That is the ability to hold space for another individual and model a calm, regulated space. It also that would be co-regulation. So an individual, typically the adult, supporting the regulation of a child, for example. Co-dysregulation can also be a thing and happens very, very frequently. And that is the dysregulated adult. I'm not able to regulate my child because of the dysregulation within self. And alertness level plays in with a lot of that. Mirror neurons is a huge facet with this co-regulation or co-dysregulation. Our ability to step back, check our own self. What is my nervous system as the caregiver identifying? Is my heart rate increasing? Is my voice getting louder? What's my temperature doing? Those interoceptive cues, right? Am I getting really hot? Am I starting to get to the yellow zone? Do I maybe need to go get a drink of water and wall lean or do some hand squeezes, grab a favorite fidget, maybe drink some sparkling water. That's a really awesome one, that kind of effervescent sparkling water. Suck on a mint or a sour candy. The power of sour. Whoa, what an awesome tool. Sour sprays have been my favorite lately. Any sort of like sour candy, those can be really, really powerful for just like kind of a jolt. It's very alerting, so it can be a nice jolt to the system. But we think about those tools that the adult, the caregiver, can implement for themselves, and then they're modeling in such a beautiful way. Gosh, and even talking through it if the situation is appropriate too. I'm noticing my heart rate is increasing. I'm going to take 5 big deep breaths. I'm going to get a drink of water. I'm going to turn down the lights. They're kind of bright for my eyes right now. It's kind of making my head think really fast, or my brain think really fast. I feel like my voice wants to get loud. I think I'm going to go into the other room, wash my hands with cold water, maybe put an ice cube in my mouth or hold an ice cube in my hands and notice the temperature. So those are examples of strategies that can support co-regulation, but that self-reflection, self-awareness of nervous system sensory needs starts with the parents. So this again highlights how deeply crucial parent coaching is. Okay. I love when I get to hear the self-reflections of the parents sharing the things that they've also practiced and found to be their power tools in those moments, because they're able to maintain this state of composure in public and regulation, and they've got their toolkit in their bag, or in their pocket, they've got their mint or their smelly bottle or their essential oil roller, whatever the tool that helps in those moments. Again, it doesn't need to be a tangible tool. It can absolutely be humming, taking a drink of your water bottle if you've got your water bottle, noticing the temperature of the water in your mouth. Lots of those mindful moment activities that help to increase our interoceptive awareness. So the pause and the thinking, the pause and the reflection, those are some really, really impactful pieces, and how it so deeply can give that model, that beautiful visual model for the child that's starting to escalate. What's mom doing? What's dad doing? What's grandma doing? I'm curious too. And even in that self, it could help with redirecting in that moment. Some other pieces that I find are really common when I'm doing parent coaching is noticing those sensory profile differences and sensory need differences in the child. So why does one child maybe totally melt down and have an overstimulation moment from the noise while another seeks loud noises? It's been an interesting recent evaluation actually, where I have a bunch of, in my in-home sessions, I have just like a drawstring bag, and I have just a variety pack of sensory tools. And they, for me, give so much insight, because I get to see in the siblings and maybe the main focal point child that I'm evaluating with a little bit more one-on-one intervention and strategies, I get to see pretty clearly sensory profile traits. So I have the hand tools. Yeah, some of them are glow balls, spiky. One is like a little microcurrent tool. That's been a really interesting one lately, just thinking about increasing the like tickle feeling, and it kind of go like you hold it in your palm. If an individual really likes it, or they're like, whoa, no thank you, or they're at level 10 and they don't even have a hand response, like that gives me so much insight. So much insight. I won't dive too deep into that one for the sake of this podcast, but that piece of tactile input and sensation, that's a fun one lately. The other pieces that I find really intriguing are the auditory tools. So I have a couple different like sound tools, and then like kaleidoscopes and some eye tools, things that glow, that sort of stuff. And I have one where it pretty clearly delineates which siblings really love loud noises and which ones love to make it themselves, but if another sibling makes it in the household, shh, no. That's a really common piece that I see. So there may be an underlying small auditory cup. So I generally want less volume or less intensity of volume or duration of the sound. And if they're in charge of it and they make it loud, that's usually totally fine. They can still have a small cup, but because they know what to expect, because they're making it, and then they have the control of stopping it. That's one facet. So that was an interesting piece. The other sibling then grabbed it, and it was like the individual who had it about the same volume, but because the sibling was using it was out of their control. They didn't know when it was going to stop. It was unexpected. Those pieces were overflowing their ear cup at that moment. And we think about kind of sibling play and how sound plays out in so many areas, so many facets with how we engage in the community, different environments. We kind of talked at the beginning about those loud reverberations of a swimming pool during open swim versus like a quiet read aloud at a library. Those are just kind of some of those examples of contrast of what we're able to handle. And then we do brainstorming, and we're coming up with solutions, and we're coming up with strategies that start to build in those tools and consistent implementation of the tools. And then the detective work of, did that work or did it not? And then why? Yeah. So that's been a really fun one. It has been really cool. We'll kind of transition a little bit to kind of what's wrong and then what is regulated. So one of those first big pieces that I feel like is kind of a foundation that I teach with coaching is, what is that reflection of the nervous system state? So that curiosity of what is their nervous system state right now? Are we in a state of sensory seeking? Are we seeking and crashing? Maybe we're in that high alertness state. Pupils are dilated, voice is loud. Am I connected to my interoceptive cues of my heart beating super fast? Is it safe? Am I being safe with my body when I do a bunch of sensory seeking? That can be common, is that we take a lot of movement risks and then we get hurt more often because we're so in such a high arousal or alertness state that we are not quite sure where our body is and how much of a moving through with fast speed we're not recalibrating as well as we maybe would if we were in a kind of lower alertness state, more regulated state. Are we in a small cup moment state? Are we saying this is too loud? Are we covering our ears? Are we covering our eyes? Are we running away into the other room? Are we disconnected from any of those cues from our body as well? Or are we really attuned to those cues and our ears are screaming at us too loud and I'm trying to go find a tool? So I find that when parents start to really deeply understand what different shifts, what different environments impact alertness level, so high alertness, just right, or really low, kind of sleepy, groggy, low response, or a more delayed response in that lower arousal or lower alertness state. They really stop like personalizing the behavior and it starts to be very strategic. And that's where I think this really beautiful highlight of empathy of each individual sensory needs comes into play in a really beautiful way. So instead of, my child's acting out and they've got this moment where they're just screaming and I don't know what's going on, it's the, wait a second, hang on. What was the alertness level like before? And what could I possibly do to shift? Can I change and turn down the lights? Can I reduce my volume and just give 2 calming tool options where there's not even a need to ask? Just holding them out. Could there be a shift to moving into a space like a tent or a tunnel or a fort? Those sorts of things that kind of can reduce down the external stimulation in the world. And I really see a lot of confidence and this expression of like, this sigh of relief, this sense of freedom, knowing that there is this beautiful new perspective and this new sensory lens of the why behind what is happening. That's been really, really cool to see. So what happens during virtual parent coaching? In virtual coaching, we definitely focus a lot on foundational layers. So we're brainstorming sensory needs. We're thinking about different environments. We're thinking about daily life locations or daily life tasks that might be easier or harder. And then we start to kind of think about some patterns. Are there patterns that pop up as we start to educate on alertness level, sensory needs, and sensory traits? And then identification of the parents nervous system needs, so crucial, so incredibly important. I really deeply am passionate about that empowerment piece of the parent, knowing and starting to sense within. Your child is dysregulated. You're feeling overwhelmed. Your heart rate is increasing. Your voice is tightening or getting louder. Your shoulders are bracing. That's your nervous system having a pretty big response to something in the environment or a moment of dysregulation that your child is having. And when parents start to recognize their own sensory and nervous system patterns, co-regulation, which we talked about earlier, can come up much more intentional instead of reactive in a dysregulation pattern. We are then, with more ease, bringing in those calm strategies for self to allow those mirror neurons to model, yeah, my heart is racing. My breath is shallow. Can I bring it back into more of a calm state? What are my things that are going to shift? Did that work? Did it not? What other tools do I need in my repertoire? So that parent nervous system piece, very crucial. And then building in practical regulation tools, trialing them, and then checking in. Did that work? Was it successful? Are we noticing a strategy that the parent or child are gravitating to more often? Is it bringing in a sense of play too? That's a really common one I see, is when we are more regulated, we're in a state of play. We're able to access play with a lot more ease. So maybe the morning time is sluggish. Maybe it is needing of alerting routines and building in strategies. Maybe it's too alerting at bedtime and we need to come up with some calming routines for bedtime. What's going to be the most supportive tool? Are there interoceptive questions that we can ask during those bedtime moments? What body part is having a hard time stopping moving? What body part needs a squeeze? Do you need to hold something with your hands while you fall asleep if your hands are moving too fast and keeping your brain up? We talk a lot about sensory supports for implementation and follow through with home programming. We do a lot of coaching on environmental shifts we can do to change the lighting, shift our voice, provide more visuals, provide different texture exploration opportunities to see if that is something that can support in the moment, choosing something with our hands to help with regulation. And then those big pieces with language for interoception. So what is my body telling me? What are those cues from my organs? Heart rate, breath rate, hunger, hanger cues, bladder awareness, tactile need. What is the emotion that's popping out? What do emotions feel like in my body? So this really highlights the levels of support. And I think that's the power of all of these wonderful things. So I'll kind of briefly discuss a opportunity that I have for local families, a little bit more in depth with the evaluation. So I do, at least in home, a 90-minute intake and evaluation, and this is going to be titled the Family Unit Sensory Profile Analysis. I know that's a lot of words, but I felt like it was really crucial to input. We're looking at the family unit, the sensory profile needs of each family member, and then I'm analyzing similarities and differences. So what are some of the traits that we see? And this is the coolest thing. This is where the magic really can happen. We don't just look at one child. We have a focal point child. So that might be your child that you're really noticing some impact on sensory needs, brainstorming a little bit more of those strategies. I also offer reflex, like primitive reflex testing, that can be an underlying piece with the sensory system or postural or body awareness. So that is included for one child. That's kind of our focus child. And then maybe we have one parent, two parents, or if there's siblings, maybe we include one sibling, two siblings. I do have right now at least a capacity of total of 4 sensory profiles. So the report is not like 30 pages as well, but we're pulling in the information from all of the sensory profiles that are completed. So the parent fills one out for themselves called the adult sensory profile. And then for their children, there's either a toddler version if your child or sibling is a toddler, and a child sensory profile. And I pull all that information together and I summarize with each of our senses: auditory, visual, tactile, movement, oral, motor, how we're tolerating or liking to chew on certain things, body position, and then there's a piece with kind of attention, focus, and social emotional. So if I'm having a lot of big emotions, that pops up a lot on the sensory profile as well. So it's important to include that there's that social emotional piece with having big eruptions very quickly, those sorts of pieces. All of that gets pulled into a report that I provide that goes through similarities, differences, and functional impact. So if we all have movement needs, what are some family movement activities that we could do all together to help meet that threshold, that bigger threshold? What if we have two sensory profiles that are auditory sensitive and two sensory profiles that are auditory seekers? How do we meet the needs, but then also still come together as a family unit without overstimulating those that might have a small auditory cup? I find a lot of times too that there is parallels. So that's also a fun piece to theme. So maybe there's a sensory sensitive parent raising a sensory seeking child. So that contrast. Maybe there are two sensory avoiding, sensory sensitive parents who have a child who needs to move and likes to talk really loud, overstimulating the cups of the parents. Maybe there's a parent with low registration who's kind of missing those subtle cues, missing input throughout the day of, oh, my kid is starting to escalate into yellow zone. Once we start to map it out, conflict and those dysregulation moments really start to make a lot of sense. And it's really this kind of reflection of like nervous system, sensory system. Are we colliding? Are we connecting? Where are we on the opposite side? And then how do we pull it together with family activities that are going to help build in that understanding, build in that language, and build in common practice and activities to help really support. So I love what I get to do. I love these moments of thinking about even progress with like bedtime. I had a client that I'm supporting in bedtime, total chaos, tears, power struggles, exhaustion. We started to kind of really dive deep into sensory strategies. What are some of those pieces underlying? And there was a lot of under responsive. So the child was under responsive all day, kind of holding it together, keeping still. And then by the evening, because they hadn't met their need, they didn't go do a lot of running on the playground at school during recess. They didn't really participate, maybe to the extent that they wanted or could have with PE. Their body is seeking super intense proprioceptive and vestibular input in the evening. So they're jumping and crashing, and then their alertness level is increasing. We're trying to bring it back down right before bed. So it wasn't necessarily a stricter bedtime. They needed heavy work before getting into their pajamas. So 30 minutes, 20 minutes, heavy work, crawling in a tunnel, rolling in Lycra, like body sock, doing kind of our routine reflex testing and reflex integration activities were also built in to help kind of ground the body. It's also a lot of times heavy work. And within a week, the bedtime shortened by like 40 minutes. It's not because the parents tried harder. It's because they understood the sensory timing and the sensory needs. And that then impacted in such a beautiful way whole family regulation and moving back to more of a consistent routine. So I think about some of those parent quotes that really have like shifted and been really, really insightful. So learning about alertness level has totally changed how I talk with my daughter, thinking about heart rate and breath rate, parents sharing how they understand their own sensory needs and their own sensory triggers of when they're starting to get escalated, and how that insight, interoceptive cues are allowing a beautiful shift from co-dysregulation to co-regulation, and that they're not fighting as much, the siblings aren't fighting as much, parent is reporting being much, much calmer, and how impactful that can be for routines, weekend adventures. These are not just like small wins, right? These are the like massive impacts on full day function, participation, sibling engagement, that parent-child relationship. Gosh, it just is so beautiful. So some other pieces we'll just kind of wrap up a little bit on like alertness level and parent insight and parent feedback. Language is another piece we talk a lot about. Instead of like, hey, stop bouncing or stop spinning, we can kind of shift that language, or I support that coaching of shifting that language to, yeah, I see your body needing maybe a little bit more. Do your muscles need to do some wall push-ups, or do you want to do chair push-ups? So giving a couple examples. Gosh, I noticed that you're covering your ears. Is there an ear tool that you need? Do you want me to make my voice quieter or turn my voice off? Do you need some headphones? Are there tools that your ears need? Maybe calming music, finding a favorite song, those sorts of things. Instead of saying, calm down, modeling, slowing breath, maybe hand on heart, lowering voice, grounded posture, maybe getting lower down to the ground. And children can really borrow that regulation before they build it. So that mirror of observation. It is such a beautiful way to practice body posture awareness, slowing the pace of the interaction with your child, really truly using sensory input intentionally and reducing that verbal overload. That can be a really important piece, just to kind of highlight of alertness level as well. So my big goal is that you understand your child and yourself so well that you can adjust in real time. So you know what sensory input helps, what environments might lead towards quicker dysregulation. Is there a shortening time frame or sensory tools that can be used in those environments? What time of day might need a little bit more of a proactive plan? Tools, prepped and ready. Snacks, prepped and ready. Talking about hanger, what that feels like. And then how the adult's nervous system can deeply impact the child's nervous system. And that's really the power of this nervous system ripple effect that I see so beautiful. When a parent starts to regulate in a different way, the whole household can shift. Power circles can decrease. When we think about safety and sensory safety, nervous system safety, the child feels safer. Safety changes behavior. It's changing the responses. And so for the parents listening right now, if you are feeling overstimulated, touched out, frustrated, guilty, confused by your child's reactions, you are not failing at all. There are so many facets to this. You are parenting in a sensory world without maybe a foundation that I discussed with sensory education. And that is exactly why I created these programs. So virtual parent coaching includes a 90-minute intake, and we're doing tons of brainstorming right off the bat, giving you some tools, parent unit sensory profile analysis, and that family unit support. That's going to be a local in-home in the Salem, Oregon and surrounding areas. And that, again, is also a 90-minute intake. And that is going through reflex testing for that focused child, sensory profile assessments filled out by parent and for child, and a beautiful opportunity to observe the bag of tools. That's always like my favorite part. I also bring one of the interoceptive tools that I bring a lot is Mr. Squishy Guy, and he's got squishy guts, and I bring him out and we start to like identify heart and where's my heart, and then we do some like body outline drawing, and that gives me so much feedback on that start of what is our kind of baseline of understanding. Do I know where my heart is? Do I know what fast feels like? So that it's all included in that 90-minute in-home evaluation together. It really is so beautiful to offer. So these are some of those facets. There's a lot of environmental recommendations, daily routine restructuring, and then each of those includes a full write-up summary, including a Google Drive that has additional resources, because I feel like having additional visuals is also very impactful and very important. So just ending with a celebration parent quote. One parent sent to me recently, I thought I needed to fix my child, like trying to fix. Instead, I learned how to support. And I think that this is the heart of this work, is we're not necessarily fixing. It's a deep understanding and a recalibration of how we approach, how we support in those moments. And empowered parents are raising regulated children. And that is like incredible. So if this episode resonated with you and you're tired of guessing and you want to understand your child at a deeper nervous system level, coaching with me with Sensory Empower might be your next step. So you can find details in the show notes about virtual parent coaching and then what that may look like for me coming in home for those family unit sensory profile analysis. You can also email me directly at bethany@sensoryempower.com, and we can reach out and get connected and see if it would be a good fit to work together. And just as always, to reiterate, you are not too sensitive. Your child is not too much. And regulation is a very powerful skill that can be learned and implemented with these strategies that I talked about today. So I just want to thank you so much for being here and for listening. And if this was a resonating podcast, please share it with anyone who you might know who would benefit from listening to this. And I will see you next time on our next episode of Sensory Empower, the podcast. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this sensory adventure through Sensory Empower, the podcast. Remember, empowerment begins with awakening your senses. Subscribe now and embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Until next time, may your senses guide you towards a life filled with peace, joy, and empowerment. Because true empowerment begins with embracing your senses.